The thing about fire is, it never apologizes for burning what tried to bury it. They didn't just cross a line, they set it on fire and laughed while you stood in the smoke. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. What they did to you was war, masked as silence and smiles. And now the ground beneath their feet is starting to crack. They didn't just attack a person. They picked a fight with the universe's favorite weapon, you. If you're one of the chosen, if you've ever been isolated, betrayed, broken down, this message is for you. So like and subscribe to help spread this truth to others who need it. When you engage, it tells YouTube to push this energy further. Help us wake more of the chosen from their silence. This isn't just content, this is a signal. Welcome, the anointed ones. They didn't make a mistake. They made a decision, a cold, calculated choice to come for your peace, your name, your soul. And now, the receipt is printing in full color, loud, public, unavoidable. You see, betrayal doesn't always come with knives. Sometimes it wears your favorite smile. Sometimes it shakes your hand while plotting your fall. What they did wasn't just cruel. It was crafted, like a trap disguised as a hug. But here's where it turns. They thought you were alone. They thought breaking you meant you'd stay broken. But chosen ones don't stay in pieces. We rebuild in silence and rise in power. The universe doesn't take disrespect lightly. And when they threw their stones, they weren't just hitting you. They were hitting the hand that shaped you. And now that hand is moving. Not with words, but with consequences. Energy doesn't lie, it returns. That fake kindness, that manipulation, that guilt they made you carry like luggage you never packed, it's coming back to them with interest, because there's something they never understood. Being chosen isn't just a blessing, it's a warning. Chosen energy haunts. It sticks to the bones of those who tried to play God in your life. They don't sleep well anymore, do they? Because the light you carry, the one they mocked, now shines on every lie they ever told, every mask they ever wore. You don't need revenge when the truth walks into the room dressed like karma. And you, yeah, I'm talking to you, stop shrinking your power just because they couldn't handle the weight of your presence. Stop doubting your light because they pretended not to see it. They saw it. Oh, they saw it. That's why they tried to smother it. But light doesn't beg to be seen. It just shines, even through cracks, especially through cracks. You weren't weak, you were targeted. Because when you're chosen, you scare people who've built their confidence on control. They thought they could outsmart the universe. They thought they could bend fate. But they forgot. The universe doesn't blink. And now, the storm isn't coming. It's already here, and it has their name on it. Stay close, stay sharp, and never forget, what they did was intentional. And what's happening to them now, that's just the echo coming home. So before we go any further, let me ask you this. Are you still carrying the silence they forced on you, or are you ready to flip the script? Drop the number 77 in the comments if you know deep down that what they did to you wasn't random, it was targeted. And now, the universe is targeting them. This isn't just a video, it's a reckoning. Stay with me, chosen one, because if this message found you, it's for a reason. And now, let's break it down, step by step. If you really are chosen, you won't want to leave. Let's begin. They didn't just bet on your silence, they gambled with fire, and now they're burning in it. They didn't break you by accident, they broke you like it was strategy. And now they're choking on the smoke of their own game. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't someone who didn't know better. No, they knew exactly what they were doing. Every smile was rehearsed. Every silence was a weapon. Every coincidence was a tactic. They didn't miscalculate. They made a gamble. a dirty one. They bet that you'd keep your mouth shut, that you'd swallow the pain, that you'd keep shrinking just enough for them to feel big. They didn't fear your weakness, they feared your awakening. See, your presence did more than bother them, it exposed them. You walked in with light, and it lit up every lie they'd ever built their identity on. That's why they tried to break you. You weren't just inconvenient, you were dangerous. A walking spotlight on everything they pretended to be. So they tried to shatter you in stages, not with loud hits, but with quiet cuts, the kind of betrayal that comes in soft tones and delayed texts, that subtle mockery wrapped in just joking, that silence after your vulnerability, that fake concern laced with manipulation. They weren't confused, they were methodical. They didn't misunderstand you, they calculated you, and then they made a deal with themselves. If we can just keep them doubting their own power, we can stay safe in our lies. But they forgot one thing. You're chosen. You're not some random soul floating in this world hoping for luck. You're marked, you're aligned, and you carry the kind of frequency that makes the universe take notice when someone plays with your peace. They weren't fighting a person, they were fighting a system bigger than them, the very universe that shaped you. And the universe doesn't forget betrayal. It doesn't forgive interference. When you're chosen, your pain becomes registered data. It becomes a signal that triggers response. And now, that response is live. The consequences they're facing now aren't just bad luck. They're not just having a rough season. No, this is repercussion, dressed in full armor. They lit a fire thinking you'd never rise from the ashes. But the flames didn't destroy you. They activated you. And now they're realizing the real fire was never around you. It was inside you. But let's flip it for a second. Let's talk about you, chosen one. Let's talk about how you kept questioning your worth because of what they did. You kept shrinking your voice because they acted like it didn't matter. You started doubting your vision, your instincts, your calling, all because they couldn't handle the glare of your truth. Why? Why did you let their fear define your future? When you're chosen, your journey comes with turbulence, not because you're cursed, but because you're carrying too much light for darkness to ignore. Your power unsettles people who've built their lives on pretending. You are the mirror they never wanted to look into, and the closer you got to your purpose, the more they tried to derail you. That's not weakness on your part, that's confirmation of your assignment. You weren't meant to blend in. You weren't meant to be easy. You were built to disrupt, to expose, to rise, even when everything around you told you to sink. So stop apologizing for making people uncomfortable. That's what fire does. It burns what can't stand. It clears what can't grow. Your existence is divine friction, and they couldn't take the heat. They bet on your silence. They bet on your softness. They thought you'd mistake manipulation for love, silence for peace, control for connection. And for a while, maybe you did, but not anymore. Because the universe is shifting in your favor. Doors are unlocking that they tried to weld shut. Their names are being removed from rooms they once owned. The system they tried to hack is now shutting them out. They weren't just messing with you, they were playing against the very code of the universe, and that's not a battle anyone wins. So when the fallout hits them, and believe me, it is hitting, remember this: it's not your fault. It's not your guilt to carry. It's not your job to save them from the karma they wrote in their own handwriting. You didn't fail. You survived a war they started. And now, you're not just rising, you're watching them fall. Number 1. It wasn't confusion. It was kindness weaponized, cruelty in costume, and you were the target. Some wounds don't bleed, they manipulate, and some smiles are just knives dressed for dinner. Let's make something crystal clear. what happened to you wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't two people failing to see eye to eye. It wasn't bad timing or someone working through their issues. No, it was cruelty. Sharp, smooth, disguised. They hurt you with intention and dressed it up as charm. They didn't just break your trust, they shattered it with a grin and then acted like you were the one being too sensitive. You see, people like that don't throw punches. They plant seeds of doubt. They hand you a smile with one hand while slipping a blade between your ribs with the other. And the twisted part, they wanted to be seen as kind. They needed to be seen as innocent, because that was part of the power play. One day, they lifted you up just high enough so the fall would hurt more. One compliment, one gesture of love, one "I'm proud of you." And then they pulled the rug, left you spinning, questioning yourself, wondering if you were the problem. That's not confusion, that's psychological warfare. They weren't chaotic, they were calculated. The timing wasn't off, it was perfect. Perfectly cruel. They waited until you were soft, vulnerable, open, healing. They waited until you were starting to trust again, and that's when they struck. Because when you're healing, you're easier to break. They didn't want to grow with you. They wanted to control the soil you grew in. They weren't nurturing you. They were poisoning you, slowly, quietly, carefully. And the world saw the smile. The posts, the polite words, the check-ins. But behind the scenes, you were bleeding in silence, unsure if your wounds were even real. Let that sink in. They made you question your own pain. That's not clumsiness, that's cruelty with a blueprint. People like this are master illusionists. They don't need to scream, they just twist the truth enough to make you look unstable. They make you explain yourself until your own voice doesn't sound real anymore. They'll provoke a storm, then step back and ask why you're so emotional. They light the fire, hand you the match, and then point to the smoke like it wasn't their fault. And the worst part, they act like they're helping, like they're being patient, like they're putting up with you. That's how deep the manipulation runs. They make you feel like the villain in your own story. But here's the truth. They weren't confused. They were comfortable. Comfortable knowing you wouldn't call them out. Comfortable knowing your empathy would paralyze your instincts. Comfortable knowing you'd choose peace over confrontation. Every time. They used that against you. Your heart was never safe with them. It was bait. They made your healing feel like overreacting, your boundaries feel like punishment, your distance feel like betrayal. But really, they just didn't like losing control. Because people like that don't love you. They love the version of you that doubts yourself. That's the version they can mold, manipulate, manage. But the version of you that knows your worth, that sets boundaries, that sees through the smile. That version terrifies them, and that's where you are now, waking up, seeing it for what it was. You didn't overreact, you didn't misunderstand, you didn't imagine the hurt. You just finally stopped making excuses for people who were fully aware of the damage they were causing. They played nice in public and destroyed you in private. That wasn't an accident. That was a performance. And when you finally snapped, when you finally started to pull away, to speak up, to reclaim yourself, they pointed the finger. You've changed. You're cold. You're so emotional. No, you woke up, you found your voice, and they hated the sound of it. Let's get real. Someone who flips between cruelty and kindness isn't confused. They're in control. And someone who harms you quietly, strategically, systematically doesn't deserve your understanding. They deserve distance. They deserve silence. And they damn sure deserve the consequences when their mask finally slips. And believe me, it will slip. Because masks don't last forever. Sooner or later, the cracks start to show, and the same people who laughed behind your back will find themselves exposed, not by your revenge, but by the very energy they put into the world. See, when the universe chooses someone, it doesn't just walk with them, it defends them. It protects the assignment by correcting the interference. These people weren't just messing with your emotions, they were messing with alignment, with the plan, with the frequency. And that's dangerous. You don't play chess with the universe and expect to win. They thought they were manipulating a person. What they didn't realize was they were tampering with a system far bigger than them. The moment they tried to destabilize you, they triggered something they couldn't predict. Cosmic backlash. And it's hitting. They're feeling it in the lost opportunities, the strange heaviness, the isolation, the doors that used to open without question, now slamming shut. That's not bad luck. That's energy returning to sender. And you're still here, still standing, still rising. But hear me when I say this. Stop looking back and wondering if you overreacted. You didn't. Stop mourning a connection that was built on control. It wasn't love. It was strategy. It was performance. It was a lie wrapped in a pretty box. And you finally stopped opening it. The only mistake you made was staying quiet for too long. But now your silence has turned into sound, into strength, into clarity. You are chosen, not because you're perfect, but because you carry something that can't be stolen or silenced. And they knew that. That's why they targeted it. They knew the world wouldn't be able to ignore you once you stepped fully into who you are. So they tried to erase you before the world got the chance to see you. But the universe never forgets its own, and now the light they tried to dim is lighting up every shadow they left behind. Their cruelty wasn't confusion, it was deliberate, it was weaponized. And now it's crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Keep walking, Chosen One. Let the wreckage speak for itself. Number 2. You weren't collateral damage. You were the mark, the mission, the one they needed, broken to feel whole. They didn't trip and hurt you. They aimed. They didn't stumble into your soul. They mapped it out, broke in, and rearranged the furniture like they owned it. Let's get one thing straight right now. You weren't caught in the crossfire. You weren't a casualty of someone's bad day or emotional confusion. You were the objective. You were the target. And every wound you carry came from a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. See, it's easier for people to paint it as a mistake. I was going through things. You just got caught in my storm. No. You weren't some bystander who happened to be nearby. You were placed dead center in their strategy. Every silence, every jab, every backhanded compliment, every last-minute betrayal, designed, directed, deliberate. They didn't hurt you by accident. They studied you first. They clocked your kindness, noted your loyalty, measured your patience like it was currency. They tested the edges of your forgiveness, slowly pushing the line back until hurting you became their comfort zone. You didn't just happen to be there. You were chosen, not for your weakness, but for your accessibility. You trusted too deeply. You listened when no one else did. You stayed long after the warning signs started screaming. And they knew it. They knew that when they started swinging emotionally, you wouldn't swing back. You'd try to understand. And that's exactly why they picked you. This wasn't a rough patch. It wasn't tension between two people trying to figure things out. This was a setup, a slow, silent ambush. They saw your light and decided it needed to be dimmed. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your very existence highlighted everything they refused to face about themselves. You were a walking contradiction to their excuses. Where they numbed out, you felt deeply. Where they manipulated, you gave freely. Where they blamed the world, you took responsibility. And that kind of energy, it exposes people. It makes the masked ones panic. because standing next to someone real makes their performance feel cheap. So they did what cowards do. They tried to rewrite you. They used your love like a weapon and then stood there watching you apologize for the wounds they inflicted. You bled out while they held the blade, and somehow they convinced you to say sorry for dripping on their floor. That's not confusion. That's emotional cruelty wrapped in cowardice. They didn't want to build a future. They wanted to build control. And the easiest way to do that was by targeting what made you powerful. Your confidence, your peace, your belief that people are mostly good. They didn't want to ruin your life. They wanted to rearrange it in their image. One where your voice was soft, your needs were smaller, and your focus was on fixing their chaos instead of following your own purpose. And when you finally started to push back, to ask questions, to demand clarity, to protect yourself, what did they do? They flipped the script. Suddenly, you were the unstable one, the problem, the one making things difficult. They didn't just wound you, they painted you as the villain in your own pain story, because that's how they sleep at night, that's how they keep the illusion alive. But here's what they never expected. You'd wake up. You'd see it, the pattern, the precision, the fact that none of it was random. And once you start seeing with clear eyes, the entire game unravels. Their charm becomes noise. Their apologies sound scripted. Their pain, imitation. Because real remorse doesn't show up only when they're losing access. Real accountability doesn't kick in just because the consequences finally arrived. They thought you'd stay lost in your own confusion forever. They thought if they scattered your pieces far enough, you'd never have the courage to pick them back up. But they forgot who they were dealing with. You're chosen. You don't break permanently. You break open. You don't collapse. You transform. And now, the same power they feared is returning with focus. You're not confused anymore. You're clear. Clear on what happened, clear on who they are, and most of all, clear on who you are. They built their chaos around your heart, and now that you're pulling it back, their entire foundation is shaking. It hurts, knowing it was personal, knowing they aimed. But don't let that truth destroy you. Let it sharpen you. Let it be the thing that ends the cycle, not just for you, but for every other chosen one still stuck in the shadows, still wondering if they imagined the pain. Because now you know the truth. Patterns don't repeat by accident. Damage doesn't land in the same spot over and over by coincidence. If someone keeps hurting you, they're not confused. They're committed. They don't deserve your explanations anymore. They don't deserve another apology. They deserve distance. They deserve silence. They deserve every single repercussion the universe is aligning for them. Because when you're chosen, you are watched over, and anyone who targets that kind of power doesn't get to walk away clean. They might escape your forgiveness, but they will not escape the echo of their own actions. You weren't collateral damage. You were the target, because your energy is rare, your presence is powerful, and your light is the one thing their darkness couldn't compete with. And now, you're no longer in their aim. You're out of reach, and they're out of time. Number 3, they didn't cross a line. They buried it, burned it, and called it love. The cruelest kind of control is the kind that makes you forget you ever had the right to say no. They didn't just cross a line, they erased it, slowly, skillfully, and without making a sound. No alarms, no big arguments, no fireworks, just little cuts, subtle smudges, until one day you looked up and couldn't recognize where the boundary used to be. That's how this kind of manipulation works, not in explosions, but in erosion. It started with something small, a joke that didn't feel right. A tone that made your stomach twist. A decision made without asking, followed by, "It's not a big deal, relax." And you did relax, because back then, you were still giving them the benefit of the doubt. They didn't break your boundaries. They reprogrammed you to think they never mattered. At first, you had standards, clear ones. You knew what respect felt like. You knew what crossed the line. But slowly, they began chipping away at that clarity. Every time you said, "That hurt me," they turned it into an argument. Every time you tried to hold the line, they painted it as weakness. Overreacting, insecure, too much. They trained you to flinch at your own truth, and little by little you started shrinking, not because you stopped caring, but because you were tired of defending your right to care at all. They made you feel like standing up for yourself was something to apologize for. So you stopped standing up. You softened your voice. You swallowed your hurt. You told yourself, "Maybe I am being dramatic." But here's what really happened. You were adapting to dysfunction. You tried to fix things by bending further. You gave more, hoping they'd finally meet you halfway. But they never planned to, because bending wasn't seen as love to them. It was seen as permission. Every inch you gave was just more space to take. And they took it, with a smile, with silence, with just enough kindness to confuse you. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't someone struggling with communication. This was a strategy. If they could blur the line just enough, they wouldn't have to respect it. If they could make you believe the problem was you, they'd never have to change a damn thing. And that's what they did, redefine your discomfort as your defect. When you said no, they called you cold. When you had standards, they called you controlling. When you got upset, they called you unstable. So you adjusted. You tried to be easier, more understanding, more low maintenance. But all that really meant was you let them walk further and further past your line, and they pretended it was normal. But now, here's the real twist. You're remembering. You're waking up. You're starting to see that you were never the problem. You're starting to realize your overreactions were actually your intuition screaming through the silence, that your discomfort wasn't sensitivity. It was truth trying to survive. Because boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. They're the line between love and control. And what they couldn't handle, what they feared, was the moment you stopped explaining yourself and started enforcing what was yours to protect. Now you've redrawn the line, not in pencil, but in permanent ink. And they don't know how to act because their favorite eraser doesn't work anymore. They're uncomfortable now, but not because you changed. No, you finally came back to yourself. You remembered who you were before they edited you into someone you could barely recognize. You were never too sensitive. You were never too rigid. You were never too much. You just finally stopped being too available for people who only understood how to take. And now, the discomfort is theirs to carry. Let them call you difficult. Let them act like you've become someone new. That's what people do when the game changes and they're suddenly playing with rules they can't bend. But understand this, they never honored the line because honoring it meant facing themselves, and that was never part of their plan. They wanted your energy, your loyalty, your presence, all the benefits of being close to you, without the accountability of treating you with respect. And when you pulled away, when you finally pushed back, they didn't just resist, they acted shocked, as if you were the one crossing lines. But you weren't. You were reclaiming them. This is what healing looks like. Not always calm, not always pretty, but clear, bold, final. And they don't get access to the healed version of you after trying to erase the parts that needed healing in the first place. So no, you're not over it. You're not bitter. You're not stuck in the past. You're just done pretending lines don't matter. And from now on, anyone who tries to blur your boundaries will be met with the version of you they feared the most. The one who remembers. The one who no longer explains. The one who doesn't flinch. The one who draws the line and means it, because the line is back, clear, bold, And this time, it's permanent. Number 4. They didn't find peace. They stole it from your sanity and called it balance. They slept easy because you stayed up unraveling. That wasn't peace. That was theft. They didn't build peace. They extracted it from your nervous system, from your silence, from your sacrifice. Every breath they took in calm was paid for by your emotional overdrive. And you didn't even get credit for it. You got labeled dramatic, too emotional, too intense, while they got to play stable, propped up by the storm they handed off to you. They didn't just survive because you were there. They thrived because you were crumbling quietly behind the scenes. Their peace was never mutual. It was engineered on your back, through your breakdowns, with your boundaries sacrificed to keep things from falling apart. Let's stop calling that a relationship. Let's call it what it really was: emotional outsourcing. You were the emotional janitor for their mess, constantly mopping up what they refused to face. Every time you bit your tongue to avoid a fight, they relaxed. Every time you apologized first, they gained ground. Every time you cried in silence to keep the mood light, they smiled like balance had been restored. It wasn't balance, it was imbalance disguised as partnership. They handed you the emotional weight, and you carried it so well that they convinced themselves they were the calm one. But calm is not character if it only exists when someone else is breaking. Peace isn't real if it's built on someone else's suppression. Let's be honest, they knew what they were doing. They knew you'd step in. That's why they stopped stepping up. They knew you'd overthink it, so they stopped thinking about you. They knew you'd clean up the mess, so they kept making it. And every time you cracked under the pressure, they acted surprised, like they weren't the ones who stacked the bricks on your shoulders. This wasn't ignorance. This was strategy masked as helplessness. They played the victim of your emotions while feeding the fire that caused them. They weaponized your empathy. They turned your need to fix into their freedom to destroy. And then they had the audacity to say you were too much, while living in a world made easier by your self-erasure. You weren't falling apart for no reason. You were the scaffolding of an entire emotional ecosystem. You were the uncredited architect behind their stability. You made excuses for their behavior, covered for their silence, rationalized their coldness, and translated their neglect into something that felt like love. But now the structure is cracking, and you're not holding it up anymore. You've stepped back. You've stopped apologizing for asking to be heard. You've started honoring the discomfort you always carried for both of you, and suddenly their world feels off balance. Because the truth is, they were never peaceful. You were just constantly in pieces. They were never grounded. You were just keeping the floor from collapsing. Now, stripped of your effort, they're exposed. Unstable, scrambling, confused by the quiet they used to crave, because without you absorbing the noise, that silence, it's not peaceful anymore. It's loud. It's echoing with all the truths they avoided, all the responsibility they dodged, all the emotional debt they left unpaid. They're finally hearing what you've been carrying all this time. The question is, can they handle it without you? And here's the brutal truth: they can't. Because real peace requires work, accountability, and mutual effort, none of which they ever intended to give. They thought peace was you breaking yourself into silence. But now that you've stopped breaking, they're the ones falling apart. Let them sit in the discomfort they built for you. Let them hold the weight they thought was yours to bear. Because the truth is, you were never the storm. You were the shelter. You were the anchor. You were the reason anything even seemed stable. You are not too much. You were just too available for someone who mistook your breakdowns for their balance. And now that you've walked away, they're not peaceful. They're panicking. They're not centered. They're cracking. Because the moment you stopped being the emotional sponge, their comfort zone dried up, and now they're left to deal with the echo of guilt, of avoidance, of everything they dumped on you now returning like a boomerang with sharp edges. So don't regret leaving, don't regret pulling your energy back, don't regret breaking the system they built on your pain. Let their chaos rise, let their illusion of peace collapse, let them sit in the silence that used to be your suffering, because they didn't create peace, they stole it, and now the bill is due, and you're finally free to build your own peace, one that doesn't require losing yourself to keep someone else together. Number 5. Forgiveness was never the debt. Accountability was the bill they never paid. They want peace without apology, closeness without confession, and healing without ever holding the match that lit the fire. They told you forgiveness was noble, that you had to let it go, that real healing meant offering grace, even to the ones who never lifted a finger to earn it, that you would be the bigger person by freeing them from the consequences of the damage they delivered like a gift and never once returned to claim. But here's the hard truth they never want to admit. Forgiveness was never owed. Accountability was, and deep down they knew it. That's why they kept dodging it. You were expected to hand over your peace like a pardon, while they walked off clean, no apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement, just silence, just revision, just the sick audacity to act like nothing ever happened, as if the nights you spent breaking, questioning, unraveling were just some private crisis you created out of thin air. No, you didn't imagine it. You didn't invent the pain. You survived it, and you don't owe your survivor's strength to the comfort of the ones who caused it. They weren't there when your self-worth started slipping through your fingers. They weren't there when you tried to explain your pain, only to be met with eye rolls or silence. They weren't there when you replayed conversations in your head like crime scenes, searching for a reason they hurt you so easily and carried on like nothing cracked. But they are there when it's convenient, when the smoke clears, when the fallout starts to fade. That's when they show up and say, just move on. Move on from the reality they refuse to acknowledge. Move on when they never even stopped. Move on just so they don't have to sit in the same discomfort they built for you. The pressure to forgive becomes its own kind of manipulation. It flips the script. Suddenly, you're not the one who was hurt. You're the one holding a grudge. You're the problem for not healing on someone else's timeline. You're bitter, angry, stuck. Not because you are, but because you won't perform peace for people who haven't earned it. They didn't ask what it cost you. They didn't ask what parts of you had to die just to survive what they did. But they've got the nerve to ask you to be gentle, to let it go, to be spiritual enough to forgive people who never once felt sorry. Let's get something straight. Forgiveness is a gift, not a rule. It's your choice, not their right. You don't have to forgive someone who's still rewriting the story to make themselves the victim. You don't have to bury the blade just because they're uncomfortable looking at the blood. You don't have to reconcile with someone who only wants access, not accountability. And no, refusing to forgive someone who refuses to be accountable doesn't make you toxic. It makes you honest. It makes you real. Forgiveness without accountability doesn't heal. It hides, it masks, it enables, it turns the person who was hurt into the one who now carries the shame of not being kind enough to forget it all. But forgetting is not healing. Minimizing is not growth. And silence is not closure. You can heal without forgiving. You can reclaim your power without giving anyone a second chance to hurt you. You can move on without letting go of the truth. And here's the part that matters most. You don't owe anyone a soft ending to the story they chose to scorch. If they wanted forgiveness, they should have started with honesty. They should have sat in the wreckage and said, "This was me. I did this. I see it now. I own it." But they didn't. They chose the easy route, distance, denial, the fake peace of pretending it never happened while you were still bleeding from the pages they tore out. They want you to let go because they can't hold the weight of their own actions. But you're not here to carry it for them anymore. That's not your job. That's not your purpose. That's not your healing. You're allowed to let the pain land, to let the truth live without censoring it for anyone else's comfort. You're allowed to say, "What you did hurt me, and no, I'm not forgiving you because you haven't earned it." That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. That's the wisdom of someone who finally knows their worth isn't measured by how quickly they forget the trauma. Forgiveness is not a requirement of healing. It's an option. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is to refuse to make someone else's peace easier than your own. So no, you don't have to forgive them, not today, not ever, unless it's something you want. Because healing isn't about who walks away comfortable, it's about who finally stops pretending they weren't bleeding. And if they want closure, let them find it somewhere else. Number 6. They weren't wolves in sheep's clothing, they were wolves whispering you into silence, one doubt at a time. The sharpest weapon they ever used wasn't a lie, it was convincing you your truth was too loud. They didn't need to hide behind a mask, not really, because their goal wasn't just to deceive you, it was to reprogram you. They weren't pretending to be harmless. They were conditioning you to believe that you were the threat, that your emotions were overreactions, that your instincts were faulty, that your pain was exaggerated. That's the trick no one talks about. It wasn't about being a wolf in disguise. It was about training the sheep to think it was the problem all along. This wasn't one betrayal, one blow-up, one moment of deception. No, this was slow, strategic, surgical. It was death by 1,000 doubts. A look, a shrug, a phrase like, "Don't take it so personally," or "You're being dramatic." Subtle enough to seem harmless, repetitive enough to erode your foundation. They didn't need to gaslight you with full-blown lies. All they had to do was nudge you into second-guessing yourself. "That's not what I meant." You're reading into it. You're imagining things. Simple phrases, deployed like landmines, designed to blow holes in your inner compass. And each time you backed off, each time you swallowed the feeling that something was off, they moved in a little closer, took a little more, twisted the truth just a little further, until you didn't trust what you saw, what you felt, what you knew. That's not miscommunication. That's mental warfare. They weren't just defending their image, they were shaping yours, until you became so unsure of yourself you stopped challenging anything, until they no longer had to lie, because you were now the one doing the work of erasing reality in real time. You stopped trusting your gut. You questioned your own memory. You apologized for your reactions. You edited your truth just to keep the peace. Peace they never earned and never maintained. And here's the worst part. They knew. They knew exactly what they were doing. That's why the manipulation was so quiet, so smooth, so expertly veiled under concern, love, or just being honest. It was never about truth. It was about control. Control through confusion. Power through silence. Because the moment you stop trusting your instincts, you become manageable, malleable, predictable. You stop making noise. You start keeping the peace. And that's all they ever wanted, access to your life without the burden of accountability. And when that tiny part of you started to rise, when your soul whispered, "This isn't right," they flipped the script like professionals. Suddenly, you were the paranoid one. You were too sensitive, too emotional, too negative. The more you reached for clarity, the more they covered it with fog. That's not clumsiness, that's conditioning. This kind of manipulation doesn't just hurt, it rewires you. It teaches you to distrust the only compass you've ever had, your own truth. And once you lose that, you're not just hurt, You're disoriented. But let me tell you something they never wanted you to know. Your instincts were never broken. They were buried. Buried beneath doubt, beneath guilt, beneath a pile of second guesses stacked up by someone who needed you unsure just to stay close. And once you start trusting yourself again, once the fog lifts, everything shifts, the game collapses, the narrative cracks, the confusion untangles, because you realize it was never about being wrong. It was about being manipulated into believing you were. That's when the memories come back. But this time, you're not rewriting them to protect anyone. This time, you see clearly the look in their eye when they twisted the truth, the way their tone shifted when you started getting too close to the core, the way their support always made you feel smaller, quieter, less sure. It all makes sense now. They weren't just hurting you, they were rewiring you. And you survived it. You're still here. And the moment you stop apologizing for noticing the pattern is the moment you begin breaking it. You were never too sensitive. You were surrounded by someone who made sensitivity a liability because it made you harder to manipulate. You were never overthinking. You were under-acknowledging what your body already knew. But not anymore. Because when you return to your instincts, when you honor that voice they tried to silence, you become unstoppable. They can't play the same games anymore because you're no longer guessing, you're knowing. And with that knowing comes power, not rage, not revenge, just clarity. And that's all you ever needed. They were never disguised. They were just loud enough to drown out your intuition until you stopped listening. Now you hear it again, and this time you believe it. And that belief is something they'll never again be able to take. Number 7. They feared your voice, so they taught you to disappear behind it. They didn't silence you. They made you erase yourself, slowly, strategically. They didn't say, "Be quiet." They just made you feel like every word you spoke was wrong, too emotional, too intense, too much. They feared your voice, not for its volume, but for its accuracy. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to exist. And yours. It rattled their lies, so they trained you to swallow it. Every sigh, every eye roll, every "you're overthinking it," those were weapons. Polite ones. Deadly ones. You learned to pause before speaking, then to doubt, then to stay silent. Not because you had nothing to say, but because they made you believe no one wanted to hear it. They didn't steal your voice. You handed it to them because they convinced you it was dangerous to be heard. But it wasn't for your safety. It was for theirs. Because your truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was evidence. Evidence of manipulation, of mistreatment, of the cracks behind their mask. And now the silence is ending. Now your voice isn't trembling. It's feral. Now they can't talk over it, drown it out, or dress it up as drama. Because the truth always returns. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. And now, let's bring it all full circle. You weren't broken, you were targeted. Your silence was trained, not natural. But that ends here, because once you see the game, you stop playing it. Once you reclaim your voice, their control collapses. If this message hit home, like the video, subscribe for more raw truth, and drop the number 77 in the comments if you're done shrinking for people who feared your power. Share this with another chosen one who needs to hear it. Let them know the silence is over and the roar has begun.